Hey everybody, welcome back. Gary Edelman, American Battlefield Trust. Here we are at Gettysburg 157. We're on Seminary Ridge. We're standing at General Lee's headquarters, and we're also standing where Seminary Ridge and Oak Ridge kind of meet. The railroad cut is off to your right, I don't know, about 50 yards or so, and you might be able to see down the Chambersburg Pike off in the distance, McPherson's Ridge, where we spent a lot of time today. Were we to look through these trees over on this end, I don't know, about 3/4 of a mile, we would end up at Oak Hill. And there's a lot going on July 1st. We've covered a lot of the battle except this, the last position to break, so we really feel like we need to sort of bring you up to speed a little bit. Before we do, make sure you share this with your friends so as many people can learn a little bit more American history as possible. And when I'm going to bring on Dan Davis now here to talk about some of the initial actions, some of the actions that are made famous by the Gettysburg movie. Dan, American Battlefield Trust, talk a little bit about what the cavalry did on the morning of July 2nd.
The cavalry plays a very prominent and important role on the morning of July the 1st, 1863 for the Army of the Potomac. The cavalry here is commanded by Brigadier General John Buford of the 1st Cavalry Division. Buford arrives here late on the morning of June 30th before the battle begins, and he recognizes not only the importance of the terrain south of Gettysburg, but the importance of the ground that you see well behind me to the north and to the west. Those succeeding ridge lines going out to, as Gary mentioned, we're standing on Seminary Ridge, McPherson's Ridge is behind me, beyond that, Hare Ridge, beyond that, Whistler's Ridge. Those are ideal defensive positions, and Buford's going to position his two brigades, commanded by William Gamble and Thomas Devon, north and west of town to meet the Confederate Army, the A.P. Hill's 3rd Corps, moving in early in the morning of July the 1st, 1863, 157 years ago today. The fighting's going to start roughly around 7:30 in the morning, and what Buford's going to do is he's going to fight a covering force action. He's going to trade space for time. He's going to slowly delay Hill's advance from the west, beginning at Whistler's Ridge or Knoxland Ridge, gradually pulling back to each succeeding ridge line, buying time for John Reynolds and a wing of the Army of the Potomac to come up from the south and take over and relieve Buford's cavalry. After Buford is relieved, William Gamble's brigade is going to peel off to the south, cover the left flank of the 1st Corps. Thomas Devon's going to have to deal with Richard Ewell's 2nd Corps, that's the 2nd Corps of the Army of Northern Virginia, coming down from the north. Buford is successfully going to extricate his brigades, pull them off the field. He'll take up a position near the peach orchard or around the Sherfy Peach Orchard that night. He'll spend the night there, and on July the 2nd he will leave the battlefield. And as I mentioned earlier today, Buford on the morning of July the 1st is going to solidify his reputation as one of the finest cavalry commanders of the American Civil War. Gary?
Thanks, Dan. I noticed we've got people from North Carolina. Las Vegas is back. We got Iowa and Idaho, Connecticut, South Carolina, Fredericksburg, Virginia, and our distance award for this one so far goes to Bristol, United Kingdom. Well done. And I'll look to see if we have our friends on from Gahanna, Ohio. I've been there. That is the headquarters of the Center for Civil War Photography, which produces a lot of the 3D assets that you see on the American Battlefield Trust channels. Thanks so much for joining us again. Share this with your friends. This is part of our Gettysburg 157 coverage. And with no further ado, let me bring on my original Civil War pal, Tim Smith. So Dan just brought up the cavalry. What's going on, Tim, on the infantry? Because this is the last place holding for the Union on the late afternoon.
You know, this area that we're standing on, Seminary Ridge, is often overlooked by people who write about or visit the battlefield. And I think that's primarily because when you visit this area on your battlefield tour out in front of us or behind me as we look out there in the distance, we are basically talking about the early morning fighting. And a lot of times we talk about the Northern victory in the early morning fighting. And then the visitor drives up to the area of the Eternal Light Peace Memorial and then north of town. And the afternoon action is usually discussed in that area. And what really excited me when American Battlefield Trust purchased the area of Lee's headquarters, not just the fact that Robert E. Lee has headquarters at this site, but also the afternoon action of the first day. There was heavy fighting throughout the morning of the first day and into the afternoon in the fields in front of us. But by 4 o'clock in the afternoon, the Northern Army had fallen back to Seminary Ridge. They formed a final defensive position. Their line extended from just south of the Mummersburg Road across this area and all the way just to the south of the seminary. The 1st Army Corps, every regiment had already seen action. Some of them had lost more than half of their men. They were horribly fatigued. But an advantage was that they hadn't been effectively using their artillery throughout the first day, and this defensive position gave them an opportunity to place cannons along this ridge. There were some 20 northern cannons from a position south of the seminary to just north of the railroad cut. And this position was a formidable line. The Southern Army that had attacked in the early morning and then in the early afternoon action, those units had also suffered heavy casualties, but Pender's division arrived with fresh reinforcements, and about 5,000 men, along with elements of Junius Daniel, would attack this position in about 4 o'clock in the afternoon. And there was heavy fighting along this very ridge. And we're going to talk a little more about that. Gary?
Good. Thanks, Tim. And I want to say a lot of other people joining, but my favorite so far, I got someone from Costa Rica, but somebody said they were from Dallas, Texas. That's Phillip, but with a question mark. You're not sure if you're in Texas? I found that pretty interesting. This is a lot of fighting. For those of you who aren't real total Gettysburg nerds, just know that there are mainly 2 Confederate divisions making the attack along the Chambersburg Pike. First Heath's and then Pender's. We're going to mostly be talking about Pender's, even though they're being supported by Heath and supported by Rhodes's division. That's Daniel's brigade that Tim mentioned. And to start to unpack this and really get into the fight, let me bring on Doug Dowds, one of my favorite guys, battlefield guide here, U.S. Army War College, and a bunch of other things.
All right, gang, so let's go ahead. Tim set up what the Union defense looks like. Let's talk about the Confederate attack. So we know brutal fighting in the McPherson Woods will finally dislodge those Union soldiers that come back here. Then we have Dorsey Pender bringing up his division. And really this attack is composed of 3 brigades. We're going to have Alfred Scales, North Carolinians. Just to their right, there's going to be Abner Perrin, South Carolinians. And then we're going to have Lane's, North Carolinians, sitting off to their right. What we can see right where we are, though, is Alfred Scales. Alfred Scales, fascinating guy, a lawyer, starts off as a company commander, new to this military profession, goes on to be the commander of the 13th North Carolina, and has now been promoted his first battle as a brigade commander. Imagine, if you will, now 5 regiments straddling the road, attacking in this direction. Now, Tim brought up, there's 20 pieces of Union artillery here. Arguably, 18 of them are north of the seminary building. Imagine that wall of lead they're able to put out. And as those Confederates are advancing this way, they transition to canister. What you'd find is those Confederates that are attacking here will get within 75 yards of the Union line. The fire is so great that ultimately they will just lay down. Now, it'll be Perrin's South Carolinians that are going to break the Union line, and we're going to catch up with them in a moment. This loss is not insignificant. Scales is wounded in a leg. This is going to lead to Lawrence leading this brigade on July 3rd, with what we know as Longstreet's and Sergeant Pickett's charge. If you think of the 1,350 North Carolinians that make this attack, they suffer almost 550 casualties during this advance. Ultimately, this will stall here for their attack, leaving the opportunity for other people to follow this up. Scales isn't done. He'll go back. He'll survive. Later on, he'll become the governor of North Carolina. I'll hand it back to Gary for a moment.
That's my name. Okay, so here we are. You're with the American Battlefield Trust, and you're at one of our signature places. Tim and others have already mentioned this. This is what we call Lee's headquarters, but we preserved a portion of Seminary Ridge, what Tim Smith often called the most important unprotected land on the entire Gettysburg battlefield. We followed up this preservation effort with another 17 acres on the other side of the roads, and we're going to be exploring some of that land in a second. Before we do, here we are at our partnership with the local Gettysburg Garden Club. So you can see Mary Thompson had a garden here. She had some outbuildings. So we want to check this out. It looks like they've done some planning, and they've been taking a great care of this right here. And you can see some of their work right here. And I'm going to go behind the camera here so that we can go along the house. This was the largest renovation the Trust has ever done by far. We had something like 40 asbestos-laden hotel rooms and buildings to deal with. We had an office, a gift shop, a putt-putt course, a mini golf, a swimming pool and everything like that. We had to rework on the house. We had to get rid of an expensive berm that was here, and do all sorts of stonework as well. Watch your step there. But we're approaching now my favorite part of the house. Not the restructuring of the house, not the creation of the garden, but rather of a particular feature that you can see in the old photos. And I'm going to have Chris, if he can, zoom into a really tiny part of this Matthew Brady photo. And what you might be seeing is a 2-bit backbeat bargain basement yard sale, dilapidated, real, just cheap looking, terrible doghouse. And my one request is that when we rebuilt this house, that we would make this thing here. Many people ask this question, you know, who was the dog? What did the dog look like? We don't know. We know there was a dog house, but we don't know if there was a dog here at the time. But you see, he has a nice comfy bed in there. You see, we've named him Austin. That happens to be the name of the contractor we used who made this for us for free, except I asked them to make this just a really just shoddy 2-bit sort of endeavor, and they made it too nice. So the day we were putting it in, I was here with a hammer and nails, and ever since then, I've been trying to beat this thing up as much as possible. Now, don't break it and don't steal it, but when you come, give this thing a whack, because it still looks way too nice compared to how the thing was at the time. So give Austin a nice little kick, and maybe we'll find this out. One artist was so inspired by all of this that he actually made a print showing the dog looking for the battle to come, and there could have been. Mary Thompson maybe had a dog at the time, and at this time we're going to cross the road, but I want to turn it back to Tim, if he's willing just to talk a little bit about Mary Thompson. I mean, you know, and do you think she had a dog? Let's walk while we talk.
Of course she had a dog. I think everybody had a dog at that time. Mary Thompson was 69-year-old. She was a widow. She had 8 children. And of course, on the evening of the first day, Robert E. Lee placed his headquarters in and around this house. And right now we're going to actually cross the Chambersburg Turnpike. And it was an important road at the time of the battle. It's still one of the main arteries into town, and it is very dangerous to cross in the middle of the day.
Okay, well, before we do it, because we know we can't quite cross yet, we know we're going to fill some time with Doug Dowds here. So, Doug, get on over here.
All right.
You had lots to talk about.
So, gang, you got to think about this. The idea that, you know, when we talk about this attack, that we got 2 brand new brigade commanders here. Think about this. You know, we often talk about the Peter principle, about people being promoted to their level of incompetence. This is massively in effect on all Civil War battlefields. Up to 1/3 of the people are serving in positions they have no experience with. Scales is a new brigade commander. In fact, 12 of 37 brigade commanders in Lee's army are new. 4 of his 9 division commanders are new. 2 of his 3 corps commanders are new. Think about the learning taking place here. We're about to talk about Abner Perrin's attack. Think about it. Abner Perrin in Fredericksburg of 1862 is a company commander responsible for probably 35 guys. At Chancellorsville, he's a regimental commander, maybe responsible for 350. And here at Gettysburg, he's now a brigade commander responsible for over 1,500. What prepares him from December to July to go from commanding 35 men to commanding 1,500 men? And Lee recognized this. Not only is the South running out of people, he's running out of leaders. He writes to John Bell Hood, "I too believe this army would be invincible, if only it could be properly organized and officered. There never were such men in the army before, but there is the difficulty. Proper commanders, where can they be obtained?" And we see the proof of that right here, not only on July 1st, but for the rest of the 3 days fighting.
All right, if we start crossing now, hopefully we won't get hit. Thanks, Doug. And here we are. We're actually crossing over to more American Battlefield Trust property. Again, thanks for your support. More than 10,000 of you sent in donations so we can preserve Lee's headquarters and restore it, as well as the James Thompson house. James, I think, Henry Thompson. And we also sort of knowingly preserved another house in the meantime. So Tim, what parts of those houses are original, and what are we standing on right about here?
Well, the stone portion of that house is the James Henry Thompson house, and that's one of Mary Thompson's children at the time. And one of the incredible stories is his wife gave birth to a child on June 30th, 1863. So even in the midst of war, life goes on. And we're actually standing near the foundation of the Alexander Riggs house. We knew there was a house here when the property was purchased. They did ground penetrating radar. We knew the foundation was there, and we actually dug up the foundation in an archaeological dig over 2 seasons, and we now know exactly where the house is and know much more information about the Civil War structure.
Good, good. So you're with the American Battlefield Trust. That's Tim Smith. He's a licensed guide and Gettysburg expert. We've got Dan Davis from the Trust. We've got Doug Dowds, Battlefield Guide and U.S. Army War College, and we're working our way along Seminary Ridge here. So Doug already sort of set up you know, what's going on. Scales attack, Perrin's attack. Let's talk a little bit more, and this could be Doug or Tim, a little bit more about the Union defense and the real Confederate attack and how this brand new former company commander, now commanding a brigade of South Carolinians, could possibly get around such a strong Union position.
So remember, we're talking about Union units, as Tim said, that have been much diminished after the first day's fighting. Regiments are now the size of companies. They're putting together this ad hoc line. Units not used to fighting next to one another are now fighting next to one another. So we're easy to see how, although they put together this compact defensive line, that there are gaps. And ultimately what we're going to find is that Abner Perrin, as he attacks across this field, is going to find a gap. He sees that Scales' men get stalled, they lie down in the field, and there's going to be a break between the cavalry of Buford's men watching the flank, and what we're going to see is Biddle's men, the 121st Pennsylvania, and what he's going to see is a gap. Now his men stall, but what he's going to do is he's going to ride out in front of them and lead them into the gap between the cavalry and the 121st Pennsylvania, and this is going to provide the break in the line that will start to roll up this Union position here. And now it's going to be a mad race to first, how do we get our artillery off of here, and then lastly, how are we going to get the infantry off this line?
Ooh, that's really good, and that's going to lead into some of what we're talking about. But until we get to the reverse slope, I want to address something else real quick, because here we are fighting. I guess, Tim, that, you know, the two sides decided, hey, Gettysburg looks like a good place to fight. Let's go, because that's a battlefield. We're going to fight on that battlefield. This isn't anybody's house. Nobody lives there. These aren't farmers' fields. Tim, come up and cure me of this impression, okay? You know, what's going on in this neighborhood on June 30th, 1863?
Well, I think the people here have no idea, obviously, there's going to be a battle. It's easier for us to anticipate today that the battle will be fought here. All the roads lead to Gettysburg. 10 roads intersected at this town. It's the county seat of Adams County. About 2,000 people lived in the town at the time. 2,400 people according to the 1860 census. Another 1,000 people lived in the countryside around Gettysburg. But maybe some of the people fled prior to the fighting, but most of the people stayed in the area, and they have no idea what they were in for. 160,000 men, maybe 50 to 70,000 animals occupied an area normally occupied by 3,000 people. It really put a drain on the supplies in the area, even before the battle, and even for the need to care for all the wounded from the fighting.
Okay, so let me just pause right here real quick, because right now we're on some of the 17 acres preserved by the trust. This is an easement over on this side. So everything all the way down to the bottom here where we're going to be walking is now under easement. The Phillip Charles Henry Croft House, I'm not sure if I messed up the order of the names there, is historic. It was here during the battle, and everything across the road that you see here, all the way down to the rail fence, is now owned or preserved by the American Battlefield Trust, hopefully eventually to be turned over to the care and stewardship of the National Park Service. So we have opened up together a whole new part of the battlefield. We know we have some more restoration to do over here, and we really appreciate everything you've done to help us and the National Park Service to be able to tell the story of Gettysburg more completely by having this land preserved and to be able to see what the soldiers saw. Now, I do want to turn it back over to Tim, but first, real quick, Doug, do you want to take this attack a little further? Because historically speaking, the next building over from the Croft House would be the large seminary building, okay? And it seems like Perrin's going on both sides of them. And what I want you to do is set up Tim so he can talk about his favorite thing, the gauntlet.
Okay, so now what we do is let's take a look at that larger attack. We've broken this down into these two brigades, but as was brought up earlier by Gary, we know there's other pressure on the Union line. The 11th Corps is collapsing to the north of town. Union soldiers are already pouring back here. And so what we have is this Union line is in a vice. It's now being squeezed from the south, from Perrin's South Carolinians. It's being squeezed from the north, and there's pressure coming in. And so what you're going to have is a massive group of soldiers as they fall back off of this position, using this geography, trying to use the roads to get to that high ground south of town. So ultimately, this attack will wheel in our direction because it's trying to cut off this route of retreat that they might bag as much of the Union Army as they possibly can. So when we talk about this, what we will now do is start thinking about the direction in which this is all headed, and I'll turn it back over to Tim.
Yeah, I think Tim wants to walk us down
down
the hill.
here just a little bit. So this part of the Union retreat is not really one that's discussed in a lot of histories of the battle. And I think there's a number of reasons for that. But one of the obvious reasons is that the Northern Army, the veterans who were doing a lot of the writing, the least said about the chaotic nature of the retreat, the better. Of course, the Northern Army win the battle. But on July 1st, the Northern Army retreats through the town of Gettysburg and back onto the hills south of it. And I think there's a propensity in a lot of the accounts to make it sound as if this is just a change of position, or that this was planned all along, a delaying action, and then a rally on the other side of town. But in point of fact, this is a massive rout, and the Northern Army is driven by force off of this ridge. Now, when I was researching this story of the fighting for my book on Lee's headquarters, I went through a lot of Northern accounts. And time again, I found these accounts of what they called the gauntlet. And I think it's one of my more successful names for any area of the battlefield that I've done. Like, for instance, Spangler's Hill, that really hasn't worked out too well.
Benning's Knoll hasn't really caught on, but let me call him right now for everybody here. Hashtag Humble Tim.
Oh. So, but the gauntlet's actually carry, and of course, all the accounts of the Northern soldiers call it a gauntlet. Not only did Abner Perrin's South Carolinians swing around the seminary building and start towards the Chambersburg Pike as the Northern Army is retreating, but also Ramseur had broken the Union line on Oak Ridge, and north of the town, Dole's brigade, after their fight with the 11th Army Corps, had started across the Gettysburg College campus. And Ramseur throwing artillery, not just into the Chambersburg Pike, but into an unfinished railroad embankment that is parallel to the Chambersburg Pike and just behind the modern buildings. Artillery's being fired in. Dole's brigade starts firing across this area, and Perrin's South Carolinians. And as the Northern Army is retreating, especially Robinson's division that has to retreat across the top of Seminary Ridge and then down into the town, the South Carolinians are closer to the town than they are. And they're hit from three sides, just like I think the first time I ever learned about a gauntlet was in the Clint Eastwood movie, The Gauntlet. But it's a literal gauntlet, hit by three sides, and this is where a lot of the Northern units suffer heavy losses. The 7th Wisconsin Infantry, the Iron Brigade, who was involved in heavy fighting in McPherson Woods, their official report says this is where they took the heaviest loss of the day. And what happens is units, because of this heavy fire, disintegrate just as they enter the streets of the town, which just only causes more chaos and confusion. And I'd just like to point out that on the retreat, we're talking about maybe in the actual town, something like 13,000 Northern soldiers retreat through the streets of the town. And something like 8,000 Southerners enter the town on the evening of the first day in pursuit. And the Northern Army pulls back to Cemetery Hill. I know we're going to talk more about that tonight.
Yeah, that's great. I think what's really good about walking the ground, you usually don't get the chance, is that here we are in a place where you figure, okay, well, that's the Union position. Well, you know what? It's a Confederate position, too. They occupied Seminary Ridge. This is the Union retreat. No, it's a Confederate advance as well. This is a Union retreat. Hey, can you imagine? How many of you imagine Scales, North Carolinians, and Perrin, South Carolinians coming up through these very fields right here to try to pinch the Union Army inside that gauntlet? It's pretty intense when you think about it. I want to say hello to a few people I've seen on here. Hello, Joe, again. And Ray Rooks, man, we've exchanged 62,400 emails in the last 12 months. Now I finally know what you look like, so that's always good to see you as well. You know, I want to just say at this time, does anybody have anything to add? I see Doug Downs. Here he comes.
Yeah,
He's
so
bouncing.
So one thing, because Tim, it really captures the idea of the chaos. And so when we think about the idea that 3,000 Union soldiers get gathered up in town, remember, when we talk about the First Corps retreating off of Seminary Ridge, remember, they leave the road south of town to get on this battlefield. They've never been in those roads before. They don't know what the town's like. They crossed and went cross-lot to get on this battlefield, and when they retreat, they find themselves on new ground, unfamiliar roads, going into a town. So now start thinking about urban warfare, chaos of coming down from the north, just mixing with the 11th Corps. If you drove 2 corps into the town with no enemy, it would have been chaos. Throw that both of them are being shot at with the fear of death all around them, and now you get the idea of the will to try and get out of the town and back up to the high ground south of town.
That's really cool. Thanks, Doug. And we're going to wrap it up here, which usually means I'm going to go on for another 10 minutes or so. But I actually really am. You know, we hope even at this late time, as we're going to wrap it up, you'll share this on your own Facebook page. You might have that friend. You can know somebody for years and not know they happen to be interested in American history or the Civil War or American military history or civilian experiences. So share this with your friends. You know, we all know how necessary it is, how really absent the study of or understanding of history is in our modern dialogue. So any little bit you can do, that's part of our job, that's our charge, and I think it's all of our jobs as citizens of this country to try to perpetuate American history. So to Doug, to Chris White behind the camera, to Dan Davis, and to Tim Smith, thanks for joining us. Thank you all for helping us to preserve this land as well as land in 23 states where American freedoms were created and defined. And thank you for supporting us throughout everything and our education. And we'll see you on other videos soon. I didn't have a good tie up there.